Great. Well, good afternoon, folks. Thank you all for coming out today. For those I haven't met before, my name's Eric Nordberg. I'm the Dean of Libraries here at UT Martin. Always happy to see a good group of people here in person. We are also doing a live stream, so hello to those that may be joining us from afar. If you are a student who's here in the audience and are interested, there's a sign-up sheet on the back table. If you put your name and your 960 number, you will be entered into a drawing that they're doing through Student Affairs and the UTM Plus program. So be aware of that. There'll be a couple of those sign-in sheets on your way out. A couple of housekeeping activities. If you go down back this way, you'll find restrooms to the left. There's an emergency exit behind this brick wall as well, should anything untoward and unexpected happen. It's always good to know. It's like the flight crew. Always remember that the nearest exit may be behind you. This event today is part of our UT Martin Research Series. This is a program that we've been running now for 4 years. I think very often people assume that UT Martin is a teaching college, and actually we are a pretty good teaching college, and we're known for the classroom education that occurs. Very often, though, people don't understand that all of our faculty are involved in research in their cognate areas. That research takes many forms. It can be laboratory research, it can be historical research, it can be performance types of activities, creative endeavors in our fine arts departments. But all of that is required as part of the university's employment for faculty. And many of our faculty extend that experience of research down to their students, whether those are graduate students in our master's programs, but very often for students in our undergraduate programs. And those of you that have attended others of these have seen some of our student researchers and the excitement that they have in doing that research. So really this is a partnership between our library function here and the provost and the the Division of Academic Affairs. We have one more event in this spring series. That actually will occur the Tuesday. We've moved it to Tuesday, May the 6th. And we always do our final event actually after commencement, which sadly means many of our students have left town. But because of that, we always have that event down at the Martin Public Library to try to expose some of this content and research out to our local community who may not always come to campus. Our speaker on Tuesday, May the 6th, it'll be at 6:30 in the evening, is going to be Derek Shepard, who teaches in our Educational Studies program. He's got a program where he's going to be looking at how race and class influences educational accessibility. So it should be a good program, again, down at the Martin Public Library. We do also, in addition to live streaming events like this that are here in our building, those are captured as recordings. And you should be able to hopefully soon to navigate to a page in the library's environment where you'll be able to look at all of the different recorded presentations that we've done through the years. So I appreciate our speakers' willingness to do that, to be captured, because those events are equally interesting to people later. I'm going to do a very quick introduction of our speaker. I could probably spend a day talking about all the wonderful things that she's accomplished, but Dr. Henri Giles came to UT Martin. I had to make sure I had this right, in 2015, originally teaching in our Department of Mass Communications. Now it's got a different name, but recently she completed her doctoral dissertation at the University of Memphis, and actually some of her content today will be drawn out of the research that she did for that work. And when she attained that degree, she's actually moved over now to our Department of History and Philosophy, where she is now helping to quarterback our new program in African American Studies. And so we're very happy to have that program moving forward. She also serves as a chairperson and leader of our annual Civil Rights Conference on campus. And if you've ever attended any of the Henry Parker series of presentations, she helps to coordinate that series of speakers. But even before she did all of this stuff in higher education, she had a whole life as a documentary filmmaker and creative filmmaker, several of those which have won awards through the years. I know I talked to some people here earlier who have seen the Waiting in the Wings, African Americans in Country Music, wonderful piece that was done, but also other pieces looking at black sacred music and some other content, which I'm sure she'd be more than happy to talk about. I think most exciting is that we do a lot of cool things here at UT Martin, but Dr. Giles was also awarded in 2023 one of the President's Awards. And that's a system-wide award that's given out by President Randy Boyd as a reflection of service to the university and teaching and research activity. So I hope you will put your hands together and help me welcome Dr. Henri Giles.
So when I look out and I see everyone, it tells me one thing. Everyone has filed their taxes, hopefully. Otherwise, you'd probably be scrambling with your accountant. So glad that you all are here, and so happy to see my colleagues, colleagues and friends from the history department, history and philosophy department, and students. Welcome. I hope that you all will be able to take something away from this, and friends from the community and my family. Got some family members here, so thrilled that you all are here. UT Martin is a regional university, and so it puts us in a really unique space to look at the areas around us. And so my presentation today is looking at Haywood County, which is a place that is near and dear to me. We have some students here. I run into them periodically who are from Haywood County as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get going here. I'm not sure why this is not advancing, so give me a moment. Okay, here we are. All right, so just starting out, I am from Haywood County, grew up in Stanton. If you're not familiar with Stanton, you're probably familiar with the fact that we have a new neighbor now, Blue Oval City. So that is now the newest resident of Stanton. These are my parents, and if you guess, yeah, that's me, the rambunctious toddler, I'm sure, at that time. But my parents were very involved in the civil rights movement, and some of their work, can still be seen and felt today. And I will mention some of what they've done a little bit later. But this letter here was written by my father. And I have to say that it is the genesis of my research. This is a letter that started me down many rabbit holes. In fact, my sister Edith came across this letter and she showed it to me, and I couldn't believe it. But my father wrote this letter to the Department of Justice in 1965. And as I go through my presentation, you will see the environment and the conditions in which people from that area lived. But the line that struck me most was the line where he talked about, can we hope for protection and justice from the United States government? It's a very bold statement and a very simple but complicated question. So this is a letter that my father wrote because of the Klan activity that was going on in Haywood County during that time. And he referenced the Ku Klux Klan that was pretty active in that area during that time. And so that was the reason why he was writing the Department of Justice, to have them look into this and hopefully provide some relief for people in that area. And so just to further give you an idea, and hopefully you can see most of that, one of the things that stood out with this article was, this is from the Tennessean from 1960. And so the shaded area kind of gives you an idea of the sentiments that law enforcement and a lot of the white residents in that area had. I won't read it because I know that the N word can be triggering for some people, but you can see it there. Again, this was printed in a newspaper. And so this was a quote from the sheriff, Tip Hunter, who is notorious, not in a good way, but notorious for his treatment of black people in that area. And so you can read there in the bold, in the highlighted area, what he said about black people. And so this was the setting, and this was one of the reasons my father and other people in that community were concerned. There's also another piece of this article that talks about Mr. Odell Sanders, and I will talk about him a little bit more later. But he was a black grocer. He was an entrepreneur. He had several companies. And the wholesalers started boycotting him. They wouldn't sell goods to him. So this article sort of talks about that as well too. So there were a lot of arrows coming toward black people at that time. Just a quick overview. I won't spend a whole lot of time looking at the theories and different approaches that I use, but just to give you a quick overview, I did conduct a case study. That's what this is. And I interviewed 6 people who gave me insight about 3 historical events that happened in Haywood County, and I'll explain those in a moment. But it's a rhetorical examination where I look at the oral narratives, the interviews. I look at media texts, mostly newspaper articles, not a whole lot of television media at that time. And the period that I'm looking at is 1940 to 1965. There were 3 significant events that happened during that time. This was a qualitative study where I look at the lived experiences of the people that I interviewed. And I also used a reflexive approach, meaning that I got to inject my voice in this. Because one of the things that I sort of discovered was I was a part of school desegregation. Hadn't really thought about it much, but as I looked at the dates and looked at some other events, so you will hear my voice, if you look at my dissertation, look at my research, my voice is a part of that as well. So these are the 3 events that I will touch on tonight and what my research is based on. The lynching of Elbert Williams. He was the treasurer of the local Haywood County NAACP. He was lynched in 1940, and it's documented that he was the first NAACP officer who was killed. A lot of people may be familiar with Medgar Evers, and Medgar Evers was killed in 1963, more than 2 decades later. But very little is known or written about Elbert Williams, who was the first NAACP officer killed. The second event is a federal lawsuit that was brought by black civil rights workers in Haywood County and the neighboring Fayette County. And so this laid the groundwork for the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that we all know about. The different things that occurred in Haywood County and Fayette County during that time led up to that. And so this was something that was relatively new to me, to know that I'm from this area where this landmark Voting Rights Act, where it sort of had its birth. And then lastly, desegregation of Haywood County public schools, which occurred in 1965. So those are the three events. As I said, I look at the lived experiences of 6 current and former Haywood County residents. I'd look at the social and political parameters in Haywood County and also the South. What was happening in Haywood County was not an isolated thing. That was pretty much what was happening across the South in terms of inequity and injustice, where people sought to control the black body and then, of course, trying to control the black narrative, which is why this type of research, I think, is really important, because we're bringing in the voices of those people who actually lived this. And so there is a focus on the restriction that a lot of people experienced, but one of the triumphant things is the resistance that black people showed. They had some very unique and innovative ways to resist the harsh conditions that were brought upon them. And so very quickly, I look at Wander's third persona, which is just an examination of the audience. A lot of times the people who are being talked about or discussed, their ideas and their perspectives are usually left out. And so this third persona is focusing on those voices that typically are not included. Also talk about vernacular discourse, just bringing in those actual voices, and also the normativity of whiteness and how that guides and directs so many of the systems that are in our society today, and just the everydayness of white privilege. Afrocentric research, that is something that has not received the attention that other areas of research has received. One of the researchers that I look at offers a critical look at that, and being critical of the academy for not focusing on Afrocentric research or black studies the way that it does other areas. And just the importance of these oral narratives. In one of my courses, I'm actually, my students have collected interviews, they have conducted interviews with elders in their families. And they are quite excited about it. They have just finished doing them, and they have discovered a lot of information about their families that they didn't know about just from these interviews that they've been conducting with them. So all of these elements are a part of the research. But the other thing is Haywood County, with it being such this, small, isolated area, there's a lot to be seen there. And with this quote that I have at the bottom, where it says pretty much how Nashville and Selma and Atlanta, those are obvious places that you would think to go to in terms of, learning about civil rights and what's going on in the South. But, the challenge is to look at these smaller areas, smaller rural areas, to get those stories. A lot of times those are firsthand accounts. And so Black freedom, which is how I make that connection to obtaining the right to vote, it's closely associated in this presentation at least. When I talk about black freedom, I'm talking about having access to the vote. It determined where you lived, how you lived, and if you lived. So that brings us to Elbert Williams, who is pictured all the way to the left, the man standing in the dark suit. That is Elbert Williams. He was quite young when he was lynched. This happened in 1940. He was a member of the Haywood County NAACP, and he served as the treasurer there. And the reason behind his lynching was that he was trying to encourage and educate people about registering to vote. And so that cost him his life. And he was abducted from his home one evening and taken away by the sheriff and his deputies. And so that gives you a sense of policing in that area. So that's Elbert Williams. He's one of the subjects that I look at. A lot of other NAACP members, and many of them are pictured in this photo. And this is the only photo that I've been able to find of Elbert Williams. You know, everything that I see about him, it's always this photo. But a lot of the other members were threatened, and several of them eventually just fled Haywood County because their lives were being threatened. But all of that happened in Haywood County, this is one of the most incredible facts. A black man was charged with killing a white man. And ironically, that's the reason for the first federal lawsuit for black people to regain the right to vote. And I say regain because during Reconstruction, there were people from Haywood County, black people, who were elected to serve in the state assembly. And so black people had the right to vote. But prior to 1960, there were no black registered individuals in Haywood County. And so a little background about this infamous case. Burton Dobson, who's pictured there on the left, he was accused of killing this white man who, as the legend says, they both had the same love interest. They were both dating this black woman, white sheriff and Burton Dobson. And so the white man who was dating this black woman went over to Mr. Dodson's house, and there was a fight and gunfire. And so Burton Dobson was accused of killing this white man, although testimony at the trial by another white deputy said that he couldn't have possibly done it because of where the body was located and some other factors. Anyway, Burton Dobson was able to get out of town after this occurred, and he lived in East St. Louis for 18 years, on the run, so to speak. And he was finally found and brought back to Haywood County. And one of the things that resulted out of that trial was the fact that he was represented by a black attorney, which was unheard of in those days, especially a black man being represented by a black attorney for killing a white person. So a lot of factors there. But he represented Mr. Dodson, And that in and of itself drew a whole lot of people just to see this, because that was really unheard of, to see this black man in court. So everyone wanted to witness that. Out of that came the organization for these two groups who formed the Civic and Welfare Leagues in Fayette County and then Haywood County. The gentleman who's pictured there at the top, Dr. Curry Porter Boyd, was from Haywood County, and he was also a professor at Jackson State Community College. But he was very instrumental in getting that organization, that group, to form in Haywood County. And he got the help of the attorney, James Estes, the black attorney, who's also pictured at the bottom there. That's Dr. Boyd in the center with the bow tie, and then to the right is James Estes, the attorney. So the two of them worked together to have this coalition. And so in less than 1 week, and this was in 1960, the League in Haywood County managed to register 141 black people, where before there hadn't been any. But with the registering to vote came a lot of turmoil, where black sharecroppers, and that's, you know, people who live on property that's not theirs, but they do the work and they share in the profits, supposedly share in the profits, they were thrown off of their properties. So anyone who attempted to vote, even if you talked about it or hinted at it, you would be thrown off of your property. And this is an image of a family in Fayette County, but they developed what we call tent cities. And so there was a tent city in Fayette County, and then there was a tent city in Haywood County as well. And I have to say, I learned about tent city in Haywood County, where I grew up, just a few years ago, really, when I was doing this research. I hadn't ever heard of it before. So people lived in these tents in the winter, in the summer. You can think about the weather that we've had recently. Imagine living in a tent with dirt floors. So this is the price people paid for wanting to vote. And so there were all sorts of delaying tactics. You know, you have all of these black people who now want to register to vote, to have their say in democracy. So there are all sorts of tactics to try to keep people from voting, in addition to, people who didn't own their own land or own property, where they were thrown out in the cold. They suffered poor treatment. There were people who waited on the courthouse doorsteps and, waiting in long lines. This is a courthouse in Brownsville. And as they made their way up, they couldn't get off of the sidewalk. They couldn't sit. They had to stand in the heat or whatever weather there was. They weren't allowed to move, but just go in the straight line. Well, when they made it up to the steps, a lot of the people were tired, and so they sat. And what they didn't know was that someone had poured acid on the steps. And so they sat in that and, of course, ruined their clothes and damaged their skin. So those are the types of things that people went through just to have the right to vote. That's why, I tell my students all the time that it's so important to register and to vote. Your voice, it does matter, because people have gone through so much to get it, but then we also see all of the things that other people have done to prevent people from voting. So after a lot of these racial incidents, this is another family living in tents. You can see the tent behind them. And these were families, people with small children. And so you can just imagine them being in a small space, a tent. But after so many of these incidents piled up, these two groups, the groups in Haywood County and Fayette County, those local groups, came together and filed a federal lawsuit against the local election commissions, companies, individuals, people who had been trying to restrict them. And so that lawsuit, or there were a couple of lawsuits, with these black people in Haywood County and Fayette County coming together and challenging what was happening to them, appealing to their government. The lawsuits that they filed, that was the foundation for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, from right here in our area. And so, of course, it impacted the way black people lived and the way that they wanted their children to live. So, you know, you talk to any parent, of course, they want their children's life to be better than theirs. And so one of those things was, you know, getting a good education. And the vote was tied to that as well. So in Haywood County, and this is an image or an article in Jet Magazine. Some of you all may remember Jet Magazine. But this is Mr. Odell Sanders that I mentioned earlier. When Mr. Sanders and his wife enrolled their children in school, in previously all-white elementary school in Brownsville, someone put a bomb under his house, and it injured his wife, and she suffered for several years after that, just with the trauma of that, not only physical wounds but emotional wounds as well. It was one evening, so the whole family was there, and so these are the types of things that went on. And incidentally, my family received a bomb threat once that I know about. It could have been more, but I remember just being really little and being swept up out of my bed saying, we have to get out of the house. And my family, we were some of the ones who integrated the local schools as well. And also, Mr. Sanders, he was the first black citizen to run for public office. So he was totally invested in the work. He campaigned in 1964. Sadly, he didn't win that election, but perseverance, just not being held down. These are the people who I interviewed for my research. There are 6 of them, 3 events, so I found 2 people to talk to about each of the events. Fortunately, I found 2 people who actually knew Elbert Williams. And you'll see there Mildred Roxborough, who's there at the top. She lives in New York. Worked for the NAACP, worked alongside Thurgood Marshall before he became a Supreme Court justice. She's still alive and doing quite well. In fact, she will turn 99 in a few months. And so I had the great fortune of talking to her, and also Cynthia Bond, who lives in Brownsville, also knew Elbert Williams, and she talks about how the terror that was expressed by Elbert Williams's wife. They were neighbors. They lived a few doors down, and Cynthia Bond remembers her frantically knocking on their door saying, "They got Elbert, help me." So I found those two people who were able to share their stories, not only about Elbert Williams, but just the atmosphere of the 1930s and 1940s. Dr. Dorothy Granberry and John Ashworth, they talked to me about the voting rights lawsuit and how it impacted their lives as well. And then with school desegregation, one of the people I interviewed is actually a sister, one of my sisters, Francine Madry. She was among the first students who integrated Haywood High School in 1965, I think. Yeah, 65. Yeah. And so she and 3 other of my siblings were part of the first group. I had another sister who was also a senior. Francine and Patricia were seniors, and my other 2 siblings, Athalia, which some of you all may know, Athalia and Cecil were a couple of years behind them. So, but they all entered high school at the same time, integrating Haywood High School. Sam Sanderlin was also a classmate, and so I interviewed him, the two of them. And I have some clips that I want to play because I think it's really important to hear these stories in people's voices. So this is the first one. This is Cynthia Rawls Bond, who currently lives in Brownsville. And so this clip sort of paints a picture of life in Haywood County in the 30s and 40s. Okay.
Let's see if we can get a little bit more sound here.
Mine is all the way up.
It is,
I think.
okay.
It's at 100.
I don't know if I can hold this microphone.
Oh, okay. We can try that.
We can try it. If I can
Okay.
figure out where the sound's coming from. Let's try that again.
Oh my, things were really tough in those days everywhere. I think I wrote a paper for somebody and I said I spent half of my life looking for signs. You had to be sure you were on the black side. You had to see the black water. You had to sit in the back. You had to be sure to see what sign, make sure you were on the right, if you were on the bus, if you were on the train, if you were in the station, wherever you were, you had to always be looking for a sign to make sure you were on the right side or on the right seat, whatever that was. It was, being black in those days, back in my day and even before, was tough because it was you had so many problems, so many things to think about, and so many things to do, and so many little things could get you killed and could get you beat up and could get you talked about and talked to. So it was rough in those days, being black, and especially I think in Brownsville. Brownsville was one of the real tough places to be. Growing up in Brownsville was tough.
And at the time that she referenced, there was a curfew in Brownsville for blacks, where by 10 o'clock at night, every black person had to be off of the streets. Otherwise, you could be arrested for no reason, just just being there. And they blew a whistle. And so when you heard that whistle, that was your cue to be off of the streets. And so this is a clip with Mildred Bond Roxborough, who worked worked with the NAACP. She says that she's still um, a consultant for the NAACP, the main office in New York. But this is a short clip of her where she talks about the events leading up to Elbert Williams's lynching. And her parents actually worked alongside Elbert Williams in the NAACP.
On Christmas Eve, when my father left, and nobody knew he had left, he went on. He went to Memphis and got the train to go to get to Kansas City, or the bus, whatever, I forget which he took, but he got there. But anyway, he left Christmas Eve night, and that was the night they had chosen to come and get him out of the house and take him down to the Hatchie River, which is near. We lived on the Mississippi, near the Mississippi River, and this little river was a branch of the Mississippi River. But that night they came apparently after midnight, when the town was quiet and people were asleep and so forth and so on, and they set fire to the house. It was a frame house, 2 stories, pre-war house, meaning pre-World War, that they had built. My parents, my mother's brother came from Arkansas before he moved to Kansas and built the house for them. Because he was, as I said, a construction person, a carpenter, and he built houses. So he did all that. And the Christmas Eve night is when they finally came to destroy the house. So they set fire to the house, thinking that my father was home in it, and that the fire would drive him out of the house, which it would have. And they would catch him and take him down or do whatever they were going to do with him. As far as we know, they shot Elbert Williams. They first of all, they came to his house and forcibly removed him from his house in his pajamas. He was in bed asleep when they came. And the sheriff had his posse, and they took Elbert into the woods. They reconstructed the story from some eyewitnesses who were willing to talk, some of the white folks who knew what went on, what happened. And so they apparently, according to the reports, shot him in the woods, had taken him down to the riverside and had shot him in the woods before dumping him in the river, because they figured he could swim, so he would swim out if they didn't kill him, and that was the whole point. So they killed him and dumped him in the river.
And so her parents, as I said, knew Elbert Williams really well. They all served in the NAACP in the Brownsville chapter together. So her story gives so much insight about the time and what people endured. This is I showed this photo earlier, but this is a photo of the members of the local chapter. And if you'll notice behind, they're standing in front of a White House. That is the house that Mildred Roxborough referenced, that the Klan or whomever, racial terrorist, came and burned, thinking that her father was inside, thinking that they were all inside. But little did they know he wasn't there. So that was Christmas Eve, 1939. 6 months later, Elbert Williams, who's there on the far left, he would be lynched. And so that's a tighter shot of him there. And the photo on the right is a photo of Mildred's parents, Maddie and Ollie Bond. And so they all suffered through the horrors of racism during that time. Sadly, you know, Elbert Williams, his suffering was deadly. This is a copy of his death certificate, and this was 1940. And you'll see in the area that I have highlighted, he was found floating in a river. An inquest was held right there on the banks of the Hatchie River. Cause of death unknown. So someone actually typed that in, that the cause of his death was unknown. So and so the next clip is from Dr. Dorothy Granberry. She was a professor at Tennessee State for many years, and but has done a lot of research on Haywood County. And so her clip is talking about the oppressive laws during that time, during the 1950s. That's when you know, black people were attempting to regain the right to vote.
Now, so that year was, at least for me, a year of terror, meaning in the sense of there was no security. These all are understanding that everybody, you know, could be told they didn't have a place to live anymore. You know, where would we go and stuff like that. Yeah. The other thing is that the whites who control the county, I think we're using things like we were almost at the point of starvation in some years, you know, like if the crop failed and so on. And again, remember, because we had no political say-so. So even stuff like the distribution of surplus commodities, they did that in the 1950s because, you know, many of us were virtually starving, and it wasn't just in Haywood County. But, you know, and they used it as a political tool and so on like that. Now, so that year was...
Oops. This is, well, that was Dr. Granberry just talking about the way that they lived, you know, almost starving because of resources being withheld. This is a clip with Mr. John Ashworth, who currently lives in Brownsville, and he touches on Tent City. Again, looking at these oppressive laws and systems that were in place.
I don't know that I had the awareness that it was a lawsuit per se, but during that period, the 59s, the 60s, because I graduated in 61, but in that 3-year interim period, I knew that there was a lot of people that were leaving the farm, being forced, that were moving into the city of Brownsville, and there were a lot of other people moving into Tent City. As a matter of fact, I actually visited Tent City, and so I knew and had the awareness because I heard the discussion among the adults of what was taking place, that people were seeking to vote, and they were being put off the land. And it was quite honestly, it was a very scary period. There was also a lot of mass meetings that were held at First Baptist Church, and I attended some of those. And I mean, it was just simply trying to organize. It was Black people trying to find a way to survive with what was going on. I mean, there was a great deal of fear in the Black community about what was taking place, but clearly we understood people that we knew that were literally being forced off of lands that they had lived on. Probably even some of their ancestors may have even been on the same land right after the Civil War.
So these are people who had relationships with the people that they worked with. Granted, it wasn't the most ideal relationship because they were essentially they were sharecroppers. So that whole system was, unjust to begin with. But these were people who they knew, who they had helped raise their children. And now all of a sudden they were cast out into the cold, literally. So that was what was going on with Tent City. And so this is, I'll go ahead and play this. This is my sister, Dr. Francine Madry. And so she gives some insight into what rural education was like pre-desegregation.
The boys would get there early. We had what we called a janitor who was an older boy, one of whom was my brother at one time. So he'd go to the school in the morning, and well, the day before we would bring in coal. We all had coal duty, and so we'd go out to the little coal house behind the school and use a shovel, and we had I think they call it a coal scuttle. We would bring coal in, and it would just sit there, and we'd bring in kindling. And so the next morning, the janitor, an older student, would come in and start the fire and get the school warm, so that when we got to school, the classroom would be warm. There were only 2 rooms, so that's how we heated our classrooms. But our parents would raise money to buy, it was a liquid green soap. I remember so distinctly. They would pour it into a ketchup bottle and dilute it, poke holes in the bottle cap, and then when we would get ready to eat lunch, we would go outside to this manual pump, and we would take turns pumping, and then everybody else would line up and put their hands under the ketchup bottle and get the soap poured sprinkle onto their hands, and then we'd put our hands up under the water to wash them. Sometimes in the winter, we would have warm water or hot water because the pan would just sit on the stove, all morning. But our parents would buy the soap, and they would purchase paper towels for us to use to dry our hands. And so it was a really great educational experience because we felt loved and cared for, and our teachers lived in our neighborhood. They went to our church, taught Sunday school. So it was like one big family.
And so later on, she talked about the funding, so to speak, the inequitable portion of money that was given to the black schools versus the white schools, getting hand-me-down books, old books, ragged books. And she referenced a stove where they had to heat the school with wood, with a wood stove, and I'm sure that's so foreign to our students sitting back there. But it hasn't been that long ago, when you think about it from a historical standpoint, it hasn't been that long ago. So if I'm able to talk to someone now about that, it hasn't been that long ago. But let's see. Okay. And I apologize for the different hairstyles. This was during COVID, y'all, and I was experimenting. But this is a short clip with Sam Sanderlin, who was a classmate of my sister's, and he was one of the first students to desegregate Haywood High School.
I think some of the teachers came there to meet us. And so, my homeroom teacher got me and took me down to the band room. See, my homeroom teacher was the band teacher. So he got me and walked me on down to the band room. And so, but in the meantime, we all was walking in the school there like that. We was in a little group. They were standing on the side or whatever, calling us names. And so.
What were the names?
They were calling you niggers. Yeah. And so, Then we got in a few fights or whatever, you know, and one boy right after school had started, you know, I was in PE and they started throwing basketballs at me and hit me. So I said, well, the next person that hit me with a basketball, I'm gonna, you know, and I said, the first person I see looking at me, I'm gonna get the basketball, I'm gonna try my best to knock him down. That's what I did. So then another guy went out and got a coke bottle and broke the neck off of him, came back and told me, said, we don't want y'all up here, niggas. Said, why don't you stay where you was? We don't want you up here. Said, I'm gonna cut your heart out. So, well, the old PE coach, old Coach Hooper I think he was the PE coach at the time, and he wasn't in the room, and so somebody said, here come Hooper. So I walked out there and I told him what happened. He told me to go sit down. And he took the boy outside and so I don't know what conversations that they had.
So that was a little bit of what he shared about his experience at Haywood High. And I have two people in the audience actually who attended Haywood High, and the stories that they tell will curl your hair. Some of the experiences that they had, my two sisters who are here. So those are some of the interviews, some clips from some of the interviews that I did. But one of the things that I think this type of research that it contributes to us knowing more about rural America, Black America, life in the South, and understanding those experiences through oral narratives, hearing these stories in people's own words. That's something that is exciting to me, and I think part of that is, of course, the fact that, you know, I've worked in media for so many years, so just having that actual narrative is something that's important to me, and I think it adds to the research that's already there, because as I said before, there's not a lot of research is given to rural America, Black America. And just very quickly, it's, you know, history is our collective memory of the past. If people don't share it, you know, what do we know? You know, we are very limited in what we know and how we know it. Individual memories last only during the lifetime of that person. So once they are gone, those memories, those experiences are gone as well. So it's really important to have those conversations with older people in your family, grandparents, you know, great-grandparents. Some of you still may have great-grandparents, but just talking to them, getting ideas about recipes or special skills that they may have, knitting or quilting, having those first-person accounts and having them in their voice, you know, really helps with understanding and gives you more clarity. And also this type of research, it's a way to present inequalities and past injustices. And of course, now we are living in a time when those narratives are trying to be erased or pushed aside. But it's even more important now, I think, to elevate those voices. I had one short, should I end this, Eric? Okay, this is the very last thing. This is a story that I did many years ago for a show that I worked on. And in terms of rural America, in terms of civil rights, in terms of people from other parts of the country who got into that fight, that's what this story is about. So.
The civil rights movement in the South provided the nation a stage where scorching racial incidents were often played out. Even after President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, the theoretical promise of equality just wasn't enough.
It just seemed that it was a time for me to act if I believed, and I did believe, in civil rights.
In 1965, Paul Thomas was a sociology professor at DePaul University in Indiana. He knew about the violence and injustice in the South and was compelled to take action.
Well, I had contacted Quakers for some kind of summer opportunity in civil rights, and they had no vacancy, but they recommended this one from Tennessee.
This assignment took him to Haywood and Fayette counties in West Tennessee. Thomas's main duty was to tutor adults in preparation for the changing world ahead. Blacks could now vote, and literacy was a major part of the process. He remembers one woman who couldn't afford that privilege.
Her boss man, white man, told her after we had started this that if she continued that reading thing with us, she would have to leave, and she couldn't stay in that house where all these people were dependent on her. So when we arrived that day, she said, Mr. Thomas, you can't come back here anymore.
Thomas's work that summer in the small black community was new and powerful. So was his living with a black family.
And we drove in a lot, I remember, and you couldn't see any lights. Well, they had pulled all the shades down, you know, but peeking out were all these little folks looking out, wanting to see that white man who was coming in to live in their house.
That house was my house, and the curious eyes belonged to me and my 7 siblings. It was a summer of discovery for all of us, as was this summer. Hey there! Bye! This interview brought back many memories from that summer.
I remember putting my car back of your house, up close to it, so it couldn't be seen from the road. This awareness of whites opposing us or not liking our presence came, you know, very shortly before I did leave.
It was a warning of impending danger that ended this particular mission. But it was just the beginning of a wonderful kinship spanning more than 3 decades.
You gotta do it right.
I can't believe you saved this.
I suppose that summer and the continuing friendship has been the most significant thing in my life.
For News Odyssey, I'm Henri Giles.
Thank you all so much. I could talk forever about Mr. Thomas. We called him Mr. Thomas. He was Dr. Thomas. But you know, you can see the link between literacy and voting. If you can't read, you can't vote. And so that was one of the things that they were doing. So this concludes my presentation, and if you have any questions. Okay, yes. They lived in Tent City for about 3 years. So that went on season after season.
Testing, testing. Did you, in your conversations, get a sense of some topics that were just too heavy for some of your subjects to discuss? The trauma was just too much?
I didn't really encounter that. They had an idea of what I was going to talk to them about, I didn't show them the questions ahead of time, but in the disclaimer, I gave them an out, and I said, if there's a topic that causes you discomfort, you don't have to answer the question. But I didn't run into that. In fact, for some of them, it was the first time that they had really talked about it in a while. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. He was referencing to you to go first. But it's okay.
Was there particular candidates that ran in the early 60s? I mean, you talked about how these people in Haywood County like really struggled to get the right to vote, but were there anybody for them to vote for? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yes.
Were there any like anti-segregation candidates or anything like that in Haywood County?
Mm-hmm. There were actually, our father ran for, what was it? It wasn't alderman. He ran for a position in the county. So there was Mr. Dan Nixon. There were several people. So yes, there were some black names on the ballots. Mm-hmm. Because that was one way that they felt they could affect change, by getting into those offices themselves. Mm-hmm. Good question.
Okay. Oops. Am I good? Okay. I graduated in '62 in Michigan.
Okay.
In Michigan at that time, you had to be 18 to work. So I was 17. So I came down to Paris, Tennessee, and was shocked. I mean, my school was segregated too, but I was shocked to walk downtown and see the white and black drinking fountains, and see the theater where blacks had to go up in the balcony. They couldn't sit down here.
Mm-hmm.
And like I told you, my aunt and uncle owned a restaurant, and we'd have people knocking on the back door to get food, and I would say something to my aunt. She says, just keep your mouth shut. You know, we don't talk about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we were that way in Michigan, but it wasn't so, lived in a small town, so it wasn't so, well, really tell you, the town I lived in was so small that I don't know if there was a black family who lived there.
Mm.
So, you know, but it shocked me coming down to Tennessee and seeing stuff.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm going to suggest if there are additional questions, I know Dr. Giles would be only too happy to have you come up and speak with her. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. And again, a reminder of our next event, which will be Tuesday evening, May 6th, down at the Martin Public Library at 6:30 with Derek Shepard. But with that, hoping you might put your hands together one more time to thank Dr. Giles. Thank you.